English translation, 371st contact. Friday, 7th of January 2005, 00.12 hours.
Just now I was lost in thought about the sad events that are taking place in Southeast Asia, because everything is coming true, as you said on the 31st of December. But be warmly welcome and greeted, Ptah, my friend. As a result of my reflection, it is a special pleasure for me that you are here, for there are a few things on my stomach that I would like to talk to you about.
Salome, my friend, Edward. Of course I am ready for a conversation according to your sense. I suppose it is to do with matters relating to the Seaquake disaster.
You hit the nail on the head. Over there I was still talking to Bernadette about it after we had finished the correction work with you. And on TV they showed how it works, blasphemously, with the donations that are so generously offered during disasters, at least on TV. In the newspapers and on the radio it is said where unbelievable speeches are made about who selflessly donates how many thousands or millions of francs, dollars or euros, etc., but that when it really comes to actually donating the promised money, many no longer want to know that they have promised large donations. This applies mainly to companies and governments, as well as to certain empires. Obviously, they are only interested in appearing big in the eyes of the world, in making themselves look good, in appearing human and helpful, in order to boost their profits and to see their names immortalized in the world press. But when it comes to paying up, they shamefully chicken out and crawl into their dark holes. And especially those are to be denounced who have immense debts and loud-mouthedly promise huge amounts as donations that they can never pay. One only has to think of the USA, which brazenly wants to donate hundreds of millions of dollars for the flood victims in Southeast Asia and for reconstruction, even though the USA is drowning in a debt swamp of around 2.5 trillion, $2,500,000. The same applies to the Federal Republic of Germany, which is also supposedly raising hundreds of millions of euros for donations, while the state is also heading for ruin in a mountain of debt of around 1.5 trillion, euros. Where the donations are supposed to come from, which are promised by the governments of these and other countries, God knows, and he does not exist, just as the promised money does not exist. When I think that during the earthquake catastrophe in Bam, Persia or Iran, $1.1 billion in donations were promised by companies, corporations, and governments, and in the end only $17.2 million, that is to say not even 2% of the promised donations, found their way to BAM, then it makes me howl and retch. And these $17.2 million were certainly not donated by the big-talking governments, companies and corporations, but by ordinary human beings, by workers and old mothers who already live a meager life and have to turn over every penny 3 times before they can spend it. And now in Southeast Asia, there is talk of several billion euros or dollars that have been collected in total and are still being collected. The only question is what is actually paid for these alleged donations, and how much of it flows to Southeast Asia. But there is something also else, namely the question of why there is so much unusual talk about this catastrophe in Southeast Asia, and why collection campaigns are organized by newspapers, radio and television, as well as by governments and aid organizations. This, while a number of years ago, when there was the great earthquake in China, and many, many more human beings lost their lives, and much more was destroyed than now in Southeast Asia, hardly a cock crowed about it. Perhaps this is only because tourism is not as important in China as it is in Southeast Asia, where many tourists can sexually assault children and women. Perhaps there are also other flimsy reasons for not providing as much aid and sympathy for China, for example with regard to politics, etc.
You say with every word what corresponds to the truth.
When I think of all that you and Quetzal have been saying for the past 2 decades regarding future natural disasters, it is only going to get worse.
Actually, there is a very dark future in this regard, because the Earth is rebuilding itself more and more, resulting in apocalyptic proportions of destruction. Seaquakes are steadily increasing worldwide and are increasingly endangering the coasts of the oceans as well as their immediate hinterland with enormous tidal waves. The shores of large lakes and rivers are also at risk. In general, landquakes and earthquakes are also on the increase and cause unimaginable damage. But just as volcanic eruptions will rage more and more, and some volcanoes will even explode, while worldwide, enormous storms of all kinds are becoming more and more prevalent. Windstorms, hurricanes, and typhoons, as well as tornadoes, snowstorms, and rainstorms will unfold extraordinarily and bring death and destruction in an extraordinary wise. Unfortunately, with all these events, a great many human beings will also suffer physical damage, and many others will lose their lives. More than 67% of these coming natural disasters will in future no longer be of purely natural origin, but will be due to the direct and indirect fault of the Earth humans, whereby the overpopulation, which can already be called criminal, is the truly fundamental factor of all evils. Therefore, it is generally human overpopulation that is to blame for everything, causing immeasurable destruction of the environment, such as catastrophic air pollution and the destruction of nature, driving the atmosphere into a greenhouse effect and destroying the ozone layer. The constantly growing overpopulation means that more and more products of all kinds have to be created for the daily needs of humankind, be it energy or be it jobs, housing, roads, and other traffic routes through which forests are cleared and fertile land is concreted over or otherwise destroyed. Also, the growing overpopulation requires more and more earth resources, such as petroleum, gas and ores, etc. And once a problem has been tackled and solved, the same problem will reappear again. Because during the time when the problem has been tackled and solved, the overpopulation has already grown to such an extent that the same problem will reappear again. Thus, the problems and all the needs of the Earth humans continue to grow inexorably, without ever being able to be overcome. It is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. By interfering with nature, the important rainforests have been and will continue to be destroyed, which have a very important influence on climate and weather, as well as the large bodies of water such as lakes, rivers, and streams, which are being dried up unreasonably. But also the landscapes are being destroyed by deforestation, as well as by the construction of highways, factories, nonsensical temples of God, large unnecessary sports facilities, and blocks of flats, etc., in order to create an ever more extensive infrastructure for the ever-increasing population. But also sources of water and streams as well as small and large rivers are affected by the humans, namely by straightening and by the robbery and development of alluvial areas. In addition to the fact that rivers, like lakes, are deprived of water and the natural course of all vital factors is disturbed. All those criminal elements who wage wars are to blame for seaquakes and landquakes, for the tremendous vibrations caused by bomb explosions and explosives of both surface and underground kind plague the entire Earth in its structure. The tremendous tremors disturb the tectonics of the Earth in such a form that unnatural tectonic shifts occur, leading to seaquakes and earthquakes. Likewise, this happens by blasting underground and above ground, such as in mining and mine construction, etc. However, the vibrations also affect volcanoes deep underground to such an extent that eruptions are inevitable. Even heavy machines bring the Earth into turmoil by their swinging waves and disturb the tectonics, as it happens with the big cities, where hundreds of thousands and even millions of humans live. The weight of people, buildings, machines, vehicles, and all other materials concentrated in such places presses on the ground to such an extent that the tectonics are severely strained and affected, causing devastating earthquakes that destroy everything and claim many lives. All these facts, however, are disregarded, denied, and ridiculed by the responsible scientists and by the responsible rulers, as well as by the majority of the earthly humanity in general, who, like foolish muttons, allow themselves to be led astray into misery and ruin by incompetent goat leaders.
For about 30 years now, I have been publishing your predictions again and again, and several times I have sent several thousand letters to scientists, to universities, to governments, and to various organizations, also concerning overpopulation and all the destruction of the environment and all other evils. All in all, however, nothing has been achieved because everything has been made ridiculous. For example, in the context of another mad idiot and do-gooder driving terrestrial humankind crazy with stupid claims. There has been very little response, if I can count it on one hand, because during all this time there was only the progressive-minded Swiss federal councillor Ernst Brugger, the president of the Philippines, Corazon Aquino, and 3 U.S. senators, from whom a reply was received. Even then, however, the reply was banal, because they were really just letters of thanks, in which the problems mentioned in my letters were only mentioned regretfully and with knowledge, but nothing was done about them. Generally speaking, the same is true of the population. If you ask someone about the whole mess, the only response is to say that there is nothing one can do about it, and that they will only do something if others do. And if you speak to somebody about the fact that, for example, an individual person or a small group is a good example somewhere, because he or she or the few are doing something against at least one of the evils, for example, that the elderly, the sick or children are being helped selflessly, then you hear only lazy sayings. There should be more of those who help others in this manner, etc. But these are only hollow and empty stale words, because why do these slogans themselves not try to do something in a helpful wise? Any idiot can say big things, but to do something yourself and to do something in a useful wise, that is something else. In fact, it is just so that if a person is not deeply in the mud themselves, or has not experienced the misery and hardship in their own body, then they cannot understand the misery of others either. Charity and compassion are foreign words for these people, who neither want to be heard, learned, nor understood in the existing self-importance, indifference, lack of feeling, arrogance, and in the exuberant megalomania and desire to be better.
All this is known to me, and all your statements correspond to what unfortunately corresponds to reality.
Unfortunately, I know. But tell me, you talked about war because of the bombings, etc., so I would like to ask you how you actually managed to end the wars among your people and to pacify everything.
Our actions were based on the actions of Nocedemion and Hanok, who were our role models. So you also know our whys of acting and the way we have gone.
Oh, I see. You created, like Nocedemion and Hanok at that time, multinational Peace Corps, which pacified the battle areas to large masses. If I am to fall back on my knowledge, then such a pacification was always preceded by a purge by special forces, in which the rulers responsible for the wars and all their army leaders were removed from office, deposed, and taken into safe custody. Thereby, the armies became leaderless, ended the wars, and surrendered and were disarmed.
That is correct. Those responsible for the wars were banished for life to places for the fulfillment of measures. So it was not the armies that were fought and warred against. No destruction and bloodshed were caused. But only those responsible were taken into custody and banished, whereby all pacification processes could be solved to a large extent through acts of nonviolence. The fact that all the leaders of the political government that started the war, and of the military forces that started the war, as well as all the ringleaders in revolutions, etc., were taken into custody and banished for life, created a headlessness or lack of leadership in the armies, and consequently, the armies disbanded. The armies were then placed under the new and peaceful government, which was formed immediately after the end of the events and which was under the supervision of the Supreme Suzerainty or sovereignty, which was responsible for ending the wars and bringing peace to the countries and peoples.
Multinational peacekeeping forces did not actually wage wars, but they did carry out pacification, which included, however, the detention and exile of those responsible for failing governments and armies. Gay vault sam age vault los ik kite, actions in logic and rationality that are beyond all might and force, was the watchword. The system was also to be introduced and applied on the earth among all peoples.
That would be the way to pacification of the earth and the earthly humanity.
With your permission, I would like to return to the coming apocalyptic natural disasters on our Mother Earth. In my understanding, all of the things you said include more and more primordial floods. Droughts caused by heat waves, great cold spells, mudslides and landslides, as well as forest fires and hailstorms of enormous proportions. I also think that the storms will affect all seas in the same form, whereby the beaches far into the country will be torn away and washed away by the raging waters in many places.
Your gloomy picture in this regard corresponds to what the future will bring. Unfortunately, the time is past, during which everything could have been prevented by the rationality of the Earth humans. If your and our warnings had been heeded and acted correctly, the coming could have been prevented. But as you have said, all warnings were thrown to the wind and ridiculed, but now the time has come when our warning prophecies begin to come true. The worst could still be prevented if the entirety of Earth humanity would finally come to understand that the increase in overpopulation could be stopped by suitable humane, but radical measures, and thus the mass of the total population, could be reduced to a reasonable planetary measure. In fact, all the evils of all kinds that are rampant today, including natural disasters, are due solely to irresponsible overpopulation, which is criminal in its reach.
It is a necessity for me to take up this topic of predictions and prophecies in one of the next bulletins and have it circulate throughout the world, no matter if that means I will be referred to as a do-gooder, painter of devilish pictures, scaremonger, know-it-all, and idiot. Perhaps the whole thing will bring some success with one human or another, that everything will be thought over, from which perhaps one day far-reaching rationality will result, and humankind will finally understand that it must change everything for the better. This is always provided that the earth is not first completely destroyed, and that humankind does not exterminate itself through its own irrationality.
You are honored by your intentions, but it is to be feared that your actions in regard to the warnings will bear no more fruit than has been the case so far. There are too many know-it-alls among the earthly people whose power is sufficient to nip your words in the bud. In particular, these elements are alleged experts in the sciences responsible for these matters, as well as in the authorities and governments and in the economy.
Your words will certainly come true, but that should not stop me from continuing to do what is necessary and in accordance with my responsibilities as a human being. Also our group members, those of the core group and the passive group, as well as those of our daughter groups and friends all over the world, take on this responsibility in one form or another, so I have good support from all of them, for which I am very grateful. Not only I, but they too, have to endure many attacks or sometimes wonder whether their informative activities actually have any meaning, when they hear and see how much of our planet is being destroyed, how wars are being fought, how women and children are being abused, sexually abused and murdered, how crime and criminality and overpopulation are becoming more and more prevalent, and how the planet and all the fauna and flora are being destroyed.
Your optimism is unbroken, but how could it be otherwise? And the fact that all those who feel connected with you and your mission do not let their optimism go down and are again and again committed to everything in a good and valuable wise is very gratifying and deserves a big thank you, which should not only come from us, but especially from the whole earthly humanity. For what is accomplished by all those who strive is just as immeasurable in its value as all the work you tirelessly do. May it be that all the efforts of a still timely day bear valuable fruit after all.
Thank you for your words, for they certainly have the effect of being a balm to open wounds on many who are striving for the mission. But now I would like to come back another time to what you have to say about the beauty craze of the Earth humans. By this I mean especially those things that directly affect the body, such as liposuction, cosmetic surgery, padding of the breasts and buttocks, etc., with implants and excessive hanging of jewelry and other things, etc. In my opinion, there is no longer a normal and healthy form of thinking and feeling, unless there are good medical reasons to perform procedures that change the body. Or am I wrong?
We have studied these issues in detail and have analyzed 476,067 women and men on Earth in detail regarding their motives and their psychic condition, which has led to a frightening result, where in a few cases, namely their 201-531, justified medical reasons existed, it has been shown elsewhere that the entire great mass without exception had medically senseless interventions made on their bodies. The reasons for this were based exclusively on inferiority complexes, paranoid ideas and delusions, but also on pathological delusions, stupidity, and foolishness.
So this means that anyone who has such procedures performed on their body without compelling medical reasons is, so to speak, abnormal?
Abnormal might not be the right word because the humans are sick in their thoughts and feelings. Only in this form can one speak of something abnormal, and this is because sickness is not a normal but a defective condition, just as stupidity and folly are.
That is about how I imagined it. Because humans cannot be all there in their minds when they abnormal thoughts and feelings allow them to cut up their bodies, etc., because they want to cheat nature in terms of physical beauty.
Humans who do such things are affected in their thoughts and feelings by paranoid influences, as well as those who think that they have achieved a body beautification by inserting jewelry or piercing all kinds of body parts and teeth.
For my part, I find such things disgusting, especially padded bottoms and breasts pimped with implants. This, along with the fact that such pumping stations and upholstery look unaesthetic and disfigure the body.
That also corresponds to what I feel. But the more earthly humankind grows, more and more people will appear who become addicted to such senseless things because men become more and more effeminate and are no longer satisfied with the natural. The longer this goes on, the more the natural is considered unnatural and no longer as satisfactory and good. Because paranoid impulses suppress reality, which also leads to humans becoming addicted to mental disorders, if not everything corresponds exactly to what they imagine and envision. For example, in women, even small breasts can lead to psychic disorders and suicide, just as many other banal and completely trivial things are flimsy reasons for suicide in men and women in general. In today's world, and especially in the highly praised industrialized countries, suicide rates are rising so rapidly in all social classes that they reach very high figures in individual countries. The reasons for this are very diverse, but some of them stand out in particular, such as the fact that humans are increasingly unable to control their thoughts and feelings, and thus the resulting state of the psyche. The basic evil lies in the horrendous overpopulation that results in humans becoming strangers to one another, as a result of the great masses and no longer maintaining real and valuable interpersonal relationships. Human-to-human relations are now only extremely superficial, cheap, and possibly geared towards profit in some kind and wise. There are no longer any true, intimate connections. Each one pays attention only to himself or herself, and almost everyone is completely indifferent to the fate of their neighbor. Social responsibility in general is being trampled underfoot, as are the social connections that should exist among humans. No one is there for their neighbor anymore. And communication is only done in relation to unnecessary things such as pleasure, money, drugs, and alcohol, the bad life situation, and many other negative things. If one person can somehow cheat, rob, or steal from the other, then it is done without hesitation, even if murder or manslaughter may be involved. From all this, however, humans' readiness to use violence is also promoted, with juveniles' readiness to use violence taking on a particularly malicious significance. The fact that both juveniles and adults carry dangerous weapons of all kinds on them without permission and are willing to use them at any time to the detriment of their fellow human beings, even to the point of murder and manslaughter, is a phenomenon that will bring much suffering. Overall, social education is also being lost more and more, so that many no longer know that behind the term social, there is the value of living together in a regulated manner in the family, in the state, and in human society, something that has nothing to do with socialism. With the stage of development that preceded communism, according to Karl Marx, which aimed to ensure that everything should be geared towards social and state ownership of the means of production and the fair distribution of all goods to all members of the community. Overpopulation, it must also be said, corresponds to an unnaturalness produced by Earth humans, which brings nothing good but only disadvantages. Another disadvantage is also unemployment, which is rampant as a result of the unreasonableness of this, because overpopulation means that there are too many human workers who could still do wage-worthy work. Everything has become so mechanized and automated or otherwise so simplified that less and less human labor is needed. For example, what used to be done by 12 humans without the high level of mechanization is now done by a single person due to the technical possibilities, if a human being is still needed at all. And not everything is controlled by automation, and one person alone is able to control and monitor a whole complex of devices and apparatuses as well as machines. As a result, fewer and fewer humans are needed for work and monitoring tasks, etc., which of course has a particularly devastating effect because unemployment is constantly rising, and as a result, humans are no longer able to receive wages and earn a living. Add to this the fact that, as a whole, today's companies and corporations are so misanthropic and act in such a wise that it is not surprising that older people who are looking for work are no longer considered, but are pushed away because only young workers are wanted. The elderly are treated as outcasts, not only in terms of the economy as a whole, but also in terms of hospitals, old people's homes and nursing homes, etc., which demand horrendous prices from the elderly and exploit them financially, as I know. Old and elderly humans are treated as waste, as unnecessary and annoying rubbish which must be disposed of as soon as possible. That, my friend, is my sad realization. A great deal could still be said about the whole thing, but let us leave it at what has now been said.
There is nothing more I can say, because you have hit the nail on the head. Unfortunately, however, the whole thing will not be able to be changed if the people do not come to their senses. If there is no birth control by means of a targeted and controlled birth stop, if the authorities and governments do not finally take the right action and take and implement the right measures. But while we are on the subject of unnatural things, what about jogging and Nordic walking, or whatever it is called, where you walk with 2 sticks in your hands? You once said that this is extremely unhealthy for the body and its organs.
Jogging and Nordic walking are equally harmful to health, because these unreasonable sports severely affect and damage the skeleton and its joints. Just as when great efforts are made, including the body's organs, whereby the entire heart functions in particular can be damaged, as well as the lungs, spleen, and kidneys. The same happens in other sports, such as football, various forms of snow and ice sports, cycling, and all kinds of extreme sports. In general, all sports for physical training are wrong if they go beyond the normal range. Anything that is not part of extremism, fanaticism, or exaggeration is to be considered normal, whereby care must be taken to ensure that even in normal sport, no excesses are made into greater effort.
So the motto in sports, too, is, too much is unhealthy. But what do you understand by normal sport? And what daily exercise does a person need? What about walking?
Normal smooth walks of 20 to 30 minutes a day are fully sufficient for the necessary physical exercise. If no walks are possible, extensive gymnastic exercises of the same duration are sufficient. Of course, walks or gymnastic exercises can be extended as desired, but they should always remain within the bounds of reason and be adapted to the condition of the skeleton and the constitution of the body. Special efforts are not necessary, but on the contrary, they can cause damage to the body, its organs, and to the skeleton and its joints, which can be insidious and quickly irreparable.
So any extreme sport is completely wrong and should be rejected.
With regard to all extreme sports, the stupid and erroneous opinion prevails among terrestrial humans that humans must prove themselves by going to the limits of their abilities and powers. This error corresponds to a paranoid form, just as it also appears in the beauty mania, whereby here too inferiority complexes are paired with stupidity and folly.
And the various sports fanatics who idolize sportsmen and sportswomen, what to say to them? Do you know that with you too?
This is foreign to our races. According to the studies that we have carried out here on the earth, sports fanatics about persons, fanatics of things, etc., are humans who, in the absence of their own initiative, are not capable of creating a higher value in terms of personality and character. In this way, these humans remain dependent on the achievements of others, because through their fanaticism, they prevent the development of their own possibilities to their own abilities and skills, and thus also the development of their own character and personality.
I have never looked at it from this point of view, but when I think about it, I see Ptah. You want to go. So I do not want to ask any more questions.
As ever, your powers of observation leave nothing to be desired. Actually, I should go. Goodbye till next week. Salome, my friend.
Take care, Salome Ptah. Then see you next week.